Hi there. Now, as you may notice, I've changed my location somewhat. I've just thought it would be nice to have a slightly different location for some videos, and specifically book review videos. I've created this sort of little reading nook in my living room for doing book reviews. Need to have my glasses on. That's better. I knew there was something wrong. So, today is a book review, and I have been rereading a Charles Dickens, and I've been rereading Barnaby Rudge, one of Charles Dickens' lesser known novels. Just to put you in the picture, I decided some time ago, because I've read all of Charles Dickens' novels, I decided that I would reread them at least once again. And I decided to reread them in chronological order of publication. And I made a mistake actually, because I've somehow missed out at the Old Curiosity Shop, which was published the year before Barnaby Rudge. So I'm going to read that one next. So, Barnaby Rudge. First of all, let me just tell you a little bit about the background of this book. Dickens wrote it about 60 years after the time it's set, or at least the last part of the time it's set. It's split very much into two halves. The first, more or less, half of the book is introducing all the characters, all their relationships, and setting up various situations. There are, as usual in Dickens, some heroes and some very nasty villains, and plots and schemes. There are two sets of frustrated lovers torn apart, and there is also an unsolved murder that took place 5 years previously that we are told about. The brother of the murdered person is one of the main characters in the plot. All right, Till. There's then a gap of 5 years. The second half of the novel is then concerned very much with the Gordon Riots of 1780, based on a historical event that took place over several days. An extraordinary set of riots in London. In actual fact, the worst riots we have ever experienced in this country, I believe. And they were sparked off by a politician called Lord George Gordon, who was very much against a new Act of Parliament that was supposed to stop discrimination against Catholics. And he was very much an anti-Catholic, and he instilled this great fear among Protestants that this act would create papism, absolute monarchy rule. Basically, he incited his followers to protest. But these protests turn into the most extraordinary, violent riots where several prisons were burned down, including Newgate, prisoners set free. And the riots started on the 2nd of June 1780 and went on till the 9th of June. And the magistrates were so scared of the rioters that they did nothing, and the army were not sent in until that last day on the 9th of June. And between 300 and 700 of the rioters were killed. Absolutely extraordinary. Lord George Gordon, and Dickens sort of has him actually regret that such an awful event was sparked off by it, but he was a very strange person, described in history as an eccentric, but obviously he was kind of obsessed with this cause. It did not do his career any good at all. I mean, you can look him up. Very strange person he was. The novel Barnaby Rudge did not do as well as Dickens's 4 preceding novels, which Pickwick Papers, Oliver Twist, Nicholas Nickleby, the old curiosity shop, which had all done very well. This one was not so well received. People thought that it wasn't as well constructed. Perhaps the subject matter was a little. It was still, to some extent, within living memory. Perhaps it was a subject matter that was uncomfortable. I don't know. It's still not one that we hear much about these days. Now, I have to say, I like it, particularly in the second half of the novel. Dickens' account of the riots is extraordinary. It is actually quite exciting. It's terrible. It's at times very difficult to read. Dickens really makes a point about how a protest such as this one, that was really coming from not a good cause, really the very prejudicial cause, feeds on itself and develops into riots where very often the rioters really don't have any idea about what they're rioting about, or they have been misled. There's a lot here about exaggeration, lies, manipulation. And so many of the rioters were caught up in the riots almost as victims, ended up in jail, ended up killed, ended up on the scaffold. And just how awful, but also that people joined the riots and led parts of the riots for their own selfish purposes and not really for any particular good cause. And I just want to read you a little passage which says very clearly just how riots can get going. One other circumstance is worthy of remark, and that is that from the moment of their first outbreak at Westminster, every symptom of order or preconcerted arrangement among them vanished. When they divided into parties and ran to different quarters of the town, it was on the spontaneous suggestion of the moment. Each party swelled as it went along, like rivers as they rolled towards the sea. New leaders sprang up as they were wanted, disappeared when the necessity was over, and reappeared at the next crisis. Each tumult took shape and form from the circumstances of the moment. Sober workmen going home from their day's labour were seen to cast down their baskets of tools and become rioters in an instant. Mere boys on errands did the like. In a word, a moral plague ran through the city. The noise and hurry and excitement had for hundreds and hundreds an attraction they had no firmness to resist. The contagion spread like a dread fever, an infectious madness, as yet not near its height, seized on new victims every hour, and society began to tremble at their ravings. I think he puts it so well, and this is what I love about Dickens. He is so good at describing particular events, particular times, and the way people respond to those events. Now, thank you. Another thing you might wonder is, who is Barnaby Rudge and why is there a raven on this particular front cover? So, Barnaby Rudge is an interesting character. In the first half of the book, you do sometimes find yourself wondering why he is the titular character. He is what you might call a simpleton, in Victorian official terms an idiot, a derogatory term these days, but that was an official term for somebody then that we now might call having special needs. In the first half of the book, he doesn't seem to be a main character. He lives with his mother who looks after him. His father, we are told at the beginning, was also murdered on the night that the other person was murdered, 5 years before the book starts. But more revelations come out about that later in the book, and I won't go any further on that. And I think maybe that's why some people didn't like the book. Certainly at the beginning, there's no clear sort of hero. There's no clear main character. There's just lots of different characters and connections. And it's not until the latter half of the book that Barnaby really becomes quite important, because he's an innocent, he's naive, of course. He becomes friends, very much manipulated by this person. He becomes friends with one of the worst characters in the book, this sort of animal-like character called Hugh, who becomes one of the leaders in the riots. Barnaby, poor Barnaby, such an innocent, gets caught up in the riots, believing it to be a wonderful, strong and good cause. So he's completely manipulated. And, Dickens is really making the point here about how real innocent people can get caught up for no fault of their own into something that ultimately threaten their own lives. So that is why Barnaby Rudge is the titular character. He's an important character because Dickens is a real spokesman for the innocent, the victims, the poor. And I think he was really making a point there that how vulnerable these people are. And why is there a raven on the front? Well, Barnaby Rudge has a pet raven who features quite strongly, and he's kind of a little bit of a comic relief because he's taught the raven to speak and say certain phrases and words, and so the raven expresses certain things for comic effect, and then sometimes for subtle symbolic effect, you might say. Yeah, I think it's an extraordinary book. I do believe it has been made into television series. I'm not sure if there's been a film, perhaps a very long time ago. I don't think it's a shame that there is not a more recent film or television series. I think it's a really good, I recommend it. If you're interested in Dickens, if you're interested in riots that took place in 1780, I really recommend reading it. I found it very engaging, particularly the riot scenes, terrible though they are. It there races along in that second part of the novel, and I enjoyed it. It has, as usual with Dickens, it does have quite a satisfying ending. I think maybe the first half of the book is probably the weaker half because of that, hasn't got that sort of strong a focus as maybe some of his other stories have. But once it gets going, I think it's underrated, basically. That's my opinion. I would be very interested to know what your opinions are if you have read it, and if you would like to read it, then do let me know what you think later on. I believe an underrated Charles Dickens novel that we don't hear of very often, Barnaby Rudge.